Hold on.
But I'm doing it, and you're not there. You go. Hey, Yoga Dragons, this is Darin, and I am with
Rob. Hello, how are you guys doing? Rob Phillips.
And we're going to have a quick, delightful, intriguing, hopefully some weed uncovering conversations today about mindfulness, especially during this time of stay at home. The challenges behind it, the benefits behind it, and some ideas for how each of us can work toward being a little bit more mindful in this really challenging, but really potentially life-altering, invigorating time. How's that?
Yeah.
There's a lot of words there. So
I would use the word potentially liberating time. I think
liberating. Thank you. Like that's actually
what
mindfulness is. Like we want to be liberated.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we were just talking a few minutes ago to kind of set up our chat here. And so kind of the theme I want to get into is really at the core of Buddhism. And I'll give a little explanation for folks who might be less familiar. So kind of the core of Buddhism is a concept called Dukkha. Now, Dukkha is often translated using the word suffering, which is an okay word in my opinion, but maybe not a perfect translation. So in Buddhism, kind of the first truth that the Buddha taught was in life there is suffering. And so to kind of clarify that, that doesn't mean that we're always in immense pain and completely, miserable all the time. It's much more basic than that. Life is a series of various levels of frustration or stress or anxiety and just, all the crap that makes up life. But the good side of that and kind of what Buddhism teaches and lots of yoga schools, this is why I'm kind of glad to have Darin in on the chat, is that we can relieve that suffering. We can liberate ourselves from it. And a lot of how we do that is how we practice in daily life, how we practice on the yoga mat and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, that's what I thought we might talk about today.
I'm going to hone in. I like one word that you keep saying.
Yeah, sure.
Liberate.
Yep. Yeah, I said it twice on purpose.
and I take the suffering to be, and especially right now with, I live alone with a bulldog. I can't see friends. I'm obviously not seeing family. But I take suffering as right now, just being this recurring theme of irritation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we dive into that word liberation, with that mindfulness, how do we begin to even liberate ourselves from that day-to-day irritation? I'm just going to let you answer that question because then I'm going to put it into action.
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to hear your opinion. I mean, in my opinion, based on my practice, based on my teaching, it's kind of two steps in the process. So the first step is to acknowledge. The first step is to notice, right? So that's why when you train in mindfulness, when you train in meditation, you hone your skills of sensing, right? You notice the breath, you notice the body, you notice your environment. And, sometimes what I feel like gets lost is you get so focused on just the observing that you forget about the second part, right? So the liberation happens, and that will be our theme words for today, I guess. But the liberation happens from being able to notice things as they are and really deeply accept it. So as opposed to fighting our resistance or as opposed to, getting attached to things that we love, like addiction is kind of dukkha or suffering in the other way, right? We're suffering because we're so hyper-focused on something and, to our detriment. So if we can learn to notice our life better, if we can learn to be more present and then also let go and relax into that, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much it. That's where it's at, right?
Yep. Well, and I like how you said relax into it, because while you're saying that, I definitely think the practice of yoga, whatever style of practice you teach, you practice, whatever, it opens up this world of opportunity to strengthen that muscle. That non-attachment muscle. I mean, it is part of the sutras. We don't attach ourselves to the actual pose. We don't attach ourselves to the outcome of this pose. We're just in this body. We're just in this shape. And I think regardless of how you practice, that non-attachment has to come through. And it helps you to feel a lot more free, grounded, and established physically. I really like the thought that popped in while you were just speaking was, I think that I love, like, and you said this before, that you're the yin side, and then, with forest yoga, I'm more on the yang side of things. But we both come from a style of yoga that we practice holding poses, right? Like it's not something, there's very little flow in either one of our styles of teaching. And if there's flow, it's something that we're neither one, like I'll speak for myself, I'm definitely not comfortable teaching. But like, as we hold those poses, like, on the yin side, it's, settling into the pose and allowing the muscular states, the tendons, the joints to actually release into the pose. Whereas, the forest approach, the yang side, the fire side, is all about being in that pose and pulling out what needs to be pulled out. Like, where it's two different, like it's releasing into it or pulling out of it. Like I think I love your yin yang observation.
Oh yeah. And I would make kind of an argument, because lest you forget, I teach flow yoga as well. But I would say in a flowing style, you can actually release into the movement, and you can surrender into the movement, right? So you can actually find, kind of fusing yin and yang, you can find that accepting quality, that sense of surrender, even when you're moving or even when you're kind of in a continuous state. So yeah, I mean, it's applicable to any style of yoga, any style of practice and life itself, right?
That's why we practice, right?
Right. So yeah, to kind of pick up there, I think that's a good segue. So I think kind of, with social distancing going on right now, and even for folks who may watch this, hopefully after social distancing is well done, which will happen someday, right? But what social distancing, I think, did for a lot of people was, I don't think we all realized how much we all had kind of escape mechanisms or habits that were actually, keeping us feeling good, but might have been preventing us from being present. And then suddenly you take away some of those and you're stuck, like being still stuck physically in your state. And the dukkha, the suffering, that's kind of our core thing. Holy crap, what is this? I'm not used to feeling this. Normally I'm...
We also, like, I'll add, like, really quickly, we also, like, create more distractions, though.
Oh yeah.
Like there's definitely, like, the thread of, overwatching Netflix, just avoidance. So when we practice mindfulness right now, I would actually say, and I'll just jump in and answer, like, the biggest challenge is practicing mindfulness right now in social distancing, like when we're all at stay home. For me, like, the things that come through are, for a lot of people, like, I'm not even going to try and do like a percentage of the population, but for most of us, our homes have now become home, office, gym, yoga studio, bar for happy hour, restaurants. Like, our home is now everything. And so that mindfulness, like just being in the same space all the time, it's harder to differentiate between, like, this is my yoga space, this is my home space, this is my working space. And so they kind of overlap. And I have found personally, like, my practice has suffered a little bit just because I'm a lot easier to be distracted. And I typically, like, even before the social distancing, I would, for most days, I would practice on my own at home anyway. But for whatever reason now, like, I've just got all these, like, mindless distractions coming through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're, like, letting yourself indulge in them more. And, like, I mean, yeah, that was my exact experience. I had this kind of, like, realization a few weeks ago, which is what I think inspired me to kind of want to talk about this, and to be like, because I realized, like, I was being completely mindless all the time, and I was feeling that, like, fundamental rub or friction or whatever it was, like, really deeply. And I think a lot of people are going through that. I mean, I've read tons of articles, like op-eds and stuff, about the suffering. And who's a work study at the studio, like, way back when this was first starting, sent that article about how social distancing is like grief, right? It's like we've lost something that we're used to. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there in terms of
so much
what we can discuss. But yeah, so I mean, I think for me, kind of a realization I had, and something I would hope to share and inspire people, is, like, not seeing hard lines between things, right? So, like, in the same way, our home space is no longer our sanctuary or our sleeping quarters or whatever it is. Like, home is everything now. So knowing that, how can we approach all of it with the same sense of presence, or the same sense of, like, acknowledgement, knowing that it's going to suck sometimes, maybe a lot of the time. Because like I was saying in the beginning, it's not about stopping the states. It's about seeing them clearly, but then accepting them and relaxing into them is really where I think the deeper wisdom can happen. So, yeah.
So what would you say, and I'm just going to like dive another maybe layer in deeper.
Of course.
One that comes up for yourself, and, you know, the irritations, the frustrations hit about, you know, homestay, like, geez, like how much can I actually like be in my house? What are some of your best go-to practices to remember to just be in that moment and allow the moment to be?
Yeah. So like specifically in my sitting meditation practice, and this is a practice that's awesome because you can do it walking about, doing your day anytime. So there's a style of meditation, style of Vipassana called noting. Mm-hmm. And so the idea, you might have done some form of this before, is simply to note what sensation you're feeling and to like really pare it down to the bare basics, right? So like that has just been a game changer for me. And it's kind of like getting back to phase one, right? This is like one of the first things you might learn if you do, say, a meditation retreat or something like that. So, you know, just for example, you know, I'm sitting at my computer here, like, blah, 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 you know, that happens. Wait, notice that has happened. Stop for a second. Okay. Touching, breathing, hearing, just check back into the sensory for even 30 seconds or less is like huge for feeling that grounding, huge for feeling like I'm here again, right? And I found I've just really made a conscious point to try to do that as much as I can in little pockets throughout the day. And it's just kind of kept my mind from spinning out of control because it's bringing it back to the present. It's bringing back to that initial noticing, that initial kind of connection with things.
It's the sacred pause.
Yeah.
Right? Like
is that a forest yoga thing? I've not actually heard that term before, but...
So like the sacred pause for me is like that moment of like in the midst of like whatever, like chaos, whatever's going on around you internally, externally, whatnot. That moment where you're able to achieve just like breath, just like being present. You know, it's, you know, the exact same thing that we're chasing in being mindful in these like really weird times. It's not about changing the time that we're in. It's just being able to be in that time. Right. And it's allowing the pause, the suffering to become smooth. Like I always think of it like and I think I said it earlier, but like a grain of sand or a sharp rock in your shoe.
You actually hadn't said that yet, but that's a good one. Yeah.
You know, it's that irritant that like,
that is dukkha. Yeah. That's a good metaphor and probably been used before, but yeah.
Yeah. And like, you know, like for me, like coming into sacred pause would be like, how do I change this sharpness into more of a smooth sensation? You know, and it's not necessarily like, and in reality, like what I have found is that like, it doesn't actually like, it doesn't change sharpness. It just changes my perception of the uptake of it.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll dovetail off that. So another way you could express what I think you're talking about is the bare sensation is the same, but the reactivity has softened. So it's in the reactivity that the suffering happens because it's like, I wish this wasn't like this. I wish this wasn't like this. And then it's finally like, this is like this. Oh, this is like this. It's like this, you know, like,
and then you're liberated.
Well, yes. Boom. Rinse, repeat several trillion times, and enlightenment can be yours for a low price of $9.99, right?
A split second. Yeah. For $9.99. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But no, seriously, I mean, it sounds kind of banal, right, when you say it like that, but like really, that's kind of what I've come back to, and it's been really like helpful for me as a teacher and as a practitioner to be like, wait, like the basics are the practice, right? Like just being here, stewing in my own shit periodically or often as much as needed, like, and being okay with that, learning to practice in the face of that. And, you know, I mentioned that we were talking about that sacred pause, and sometimes you just will be noting, this sucks. I'm anxious. And it can go on for seemingly forever, but you know, the training to do that or the practicing of doing that is helpful over the long term, right?
Yeah. And I just wrote, like you just said something and I had to write it because it's I think it's brilliant in its simplicity. The basics are the practice, right? Like that's something that, especially as like yogis who, and I'll speak for myself definitely, like, the yogis who are on Instagram and like trying to achieve like different poses and like monitor different poses and get into different shapes. Like, we tend to lose focus on, the basics of the practice, which is breath, being present. Boom, you got it, right? Like, I think that quote's brilliant, Rob.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that's how I try and frame all my teaching. I mean, whether I'm working up to a super complicated pose, not that I teach anything super fancy in my classes, but it always starts with, we begin the basics. And if your basics are solid, like, that's where it's at. Like, if you can master an awesome chaturanga, you can do arm balances, you can do handstand, you can do stuff. So like, don't skip your plank pose, don't skip your chaturanga, because that's like, that's where it starts, right?
Everything builds on everything else.
Yeah. Well, we just got into the physical side, but
we did get into the physical side.
But it's all related, right?
But that's coming back to like the segue for me back to mindfulness is, the basics for me of being mindful are, taking a step back, taking some massive breath, and just allowing the state of my mind to free flow. Like literally, like when I step into like a meditation that I'm just like, okay, I'm going crazy, give me a minute. Like I literally will let my mind just like free flow for the first like 30 to 40 seconds. And then it slowly starts to meet up with my breath. And as long as I'm present with my breath, I know eventually my mind will catch up and we'll get the clue that like, oh, now is not the time to be in chaos. Now is the time to be with breath and to be calming and to be present. And so like, for me, like that's the basic move of mindfulness in my own practice. Would you say you have a basic mindfulness move, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Like, yeah, my head was somewhere else where you're talking about that. So maybe I need to rewind back because I had another thought I was going to jump off into. But well, maybe, you know what, actually my thought does relate to that. So like, actually, I won't take credit for this because actually, I don't even remember the guy's name, but a guy I met on my first meditation retreat, when the retreat was broken, we were allowed to talk again, was talking about, oh man, sometimes, it's just like, do you remember that Maxell commercial where there's like the guy in the chair in his apartment and the stereo comes on and everything just starts blowing by him and he's like getting pushed back. And I was just like, whoa. Like that's kind of what it feels like sometimes, right? You're just like sitting there and like everything's coming at you and just like, but you're just chill. You got your sunglasses on. You're like, this is okay. I can be equanimous despite all the crazy stuff coming out of me.
I can totally be part of this.
Yeah.
That's like, that might be one of the most random commercial pull-ups ever.
Yeah, but if you remember that commercial, right?
I do. Like
those of us watching are old enough to remember.
I was like, the cassette tape Maxell? Like, yes, isn't that what they did?
Yeah, but just the idea of like, whoa, buckle up, everything's going on here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm okay with that.
So coming back
sometimes
to like,
it's more like that. Sometimes it's more like Zen and like you're getting centered with the breath and all that, right? We need both.
We need both. Do you think that, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask the question.
Ask me anyway. This isn't just for you and I. This is for everyone listening, right?
Do you think that mindfulness is do you think mindfulness requires sitting and being still, or are there other motives of mindfulness? Because I want to like offer anybody who watches this like opportunities.
I'll say it in two parts. So my non-dogmatic opinion is, or like, sorry, maybe it is dogmatic, but my opinion, I'm just some yoga teacher, right? Who cares what I think? I do think there's a special value to sitting that can only be gotten from sitting meditation practice. I think it has kind of a unique power in and of itself that is not quite possible with other modes of mindfulness. Now, with that said, other forms of mindfulness are just as important, and you can't even do a sitting practice without the other stuff. And, for folks who are sitting averse or who maybe just can't find a way to do that, I would much rather see them do what they can, right? Incorporate it in. And for me, like I love yin yoga because it's kind of a backdoor way into getting people meditating, right? It's like what you call the yoga poses, you're doing all the same stuff you do in a seated meditation. You're just doing it in a way that people can wrap their head around and be like, okay, I only need to sit still for a few minutes and this feels pretty good in the pose anyway. So, I can work with that. So,
well, I appreciate that because I used to be I hated seated meditations. I hated them because I'm not one who can sit very well.
Mm-hmm.
And so my entry point into the meditative state years ago was running.
Oh, yeah.
I could literally just I could go out for a run, and within a half mile, my mind was quiet, it was calm. And it was from that space of remembering how my runs felt that I was slowly able to start developing a seated meditation
Cool.
and a seated mindfulness practice, because initially I hated it. I hated it.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that is extremely common. And I've been practicing for 13 years now, and I still struggle sometimes just to sit still. So, I mean, it's but, since we're talking about it, to give the sell for why I still think seated meditation is important and doing the other stuff is not quite the same thing. When you can train yourself to be still physically and mentally, there's a kind of peace or a kind of stillness that you just cannot possibly get to in other modes when you're actually moving, when you're outwardly engaged, because the mind's always participating, right? Even if you are being present, you're still doing something, you're still making happening, right? When you get into deeper meditation, when you do it for long enough, the mind can get very, very still. And it's about, you're no longer adding input into the system. And once you stop adding that input, that's the calm, that's the peace that, when in the very beginning, again, tying this all together, I talked about it's about noticing and it's about letting go. Well, the more you let go, the more quiet you get. The more quiet you get, the more still you get. And actually, I have a blog about this on my website that I wrote a while ago. The crazy thing is, when the mind gets still, the body also gets completely relaxed. So the mental practice becomes a physical practice or becomes an energetic practice. I think when the yogis, you see these pictures with the chakras and it's all lit up, right? Well, you can feel that when you get deep into meditation, you can feel your energy. And so even though it feels like you're not doing a physical practice anymore, you still very much are. You're just kind of coming at it from a different angle, if that makes sense. So
it totally makes sense. And I think what is prompting in me is just a reminder that the practice, whatever it is that you're practicing, it has to go across all gamuts in some way, shape, or form. Being mindful isn't just a practice of, quieting the mind. It's guiding the mind into a space physically that, you're comfortable and you're free from that suffering. You're free from the sharp edges. You're free from the brightness, the harshness of your reality. Mm-hmm. You can't actually achieve that. I don't think anyway. And I don't think you can achieve that only focusing on the mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I was actually going to add a disclaimer because I realized what I might have said could come off the wrong way. Seated meditation is not the end all be all. And there are definitely times when seated meditation is not the right practice, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe depending on where your body is at or where your life is at, where your mood is at, it's not the right time. What I'm saying is when the conditions are right, when you are there, it can be this really wonderful thing. But that's why we have yoga. That's why we have even just that touching base, like I was talking about, while I'm doing the dishes, oh, there's my feet, there's my hands. Oh, hear the sound. You know what I mean? Just so in a way, it's maybe the illusion is when you go meditate and you're gazing at your navel and you're astral projecting into some different plane, right? But it's actually the opposite. We want to be more present for our life, whether we're sitting down being still, whether we're engaged in the world, whether we're in downward dog, whatever the heck it is, right? Your mindfulness practice should make you feel more connected to whatever that is.
Oh yeah, astral projecting, I would say, is definitely not a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely definitely not. There's some attributes that you need to be mindful of, but in the whole, I've never done an astral projection practice and then come back and been wow, I feel free and fresh. No, it doesn't work like that.
We'll save that one for our next chat, but yeah.
So I want to continue this later on. I actually potentially want to also bring you into a conversation with Jess about this, because she's got neurological stuff.
Oh yeah, we didn't even touch on that. I'd love to talk about that stuff. So.
Oh God, you two would go.
Yeah, well, and just to kind of plant a little seed on that, there is like a growing body of evidence that mindfulness practice physically changes the brain, and you're working with neurotransmitters and working with all sorts of stuff it's very measurable, it's very tangible. So it's really cool.
So what would be your number 1 through maybe top 4 or 5 tips for somebody on easing the irritations of social distancing right now?
Yeah, or softening dukkha and achieving liberation. Yeah.
Finding liberation with your mask on.
That's a tough one. So you put me on the spot here, but let me try and think of 5 is a lot, maybe 3 or 4 I can muster here.
That's fine. That's fine.
And then I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that too. But the first one, and we already talked about this, taking pauses, stopping every once in a while. And I like that sacred pause idea. Just like 30 seconds, I'm going to be still, right? And, 30 seconds could turn into a few minutes, or if you have time to do, an actual meditation or practice like that, awesome. But if you don't, 30 seconds here or there, you start adding all those up. Suddenly, how many moments of your day are you being present, right? So that's the first one. So that's, and in fact, that can actually tie to what I've been talking about all along, right? So first we notice, first we train ourselves to be present, to tune in. And then second, learning to accept what's here, knowing that sometimes what we notice is going to suck, right? Sometimes we're going to feel just, or that like stress or that anxiety, but hopefully at least some of the time we feel okay and we feel pretty good, and noticing that too, right? So you kind of learn to ride the waves, you learn to ride the spectrum. And I guess the third one is also to just be okay with the dukkha, be okay with the suffering, knowing that sometimes it is just going to suck. And rather than fighting that, see if you can train yourself to hold it more softly, train yourself just to notice it a bit better. So I'm going to leave it at 3 because I think
I love those. I'm going to add a 4th. One that's helped me tremendously, and I would say my first 3 are like really closely tied to yours, but the 4th one, especially in those moments where I'm really, really feeling irritated, it helps me to add like a mantra along the lines of, this is only temporary and this too shall pass. We get stuck in this mindset that, when we don't know necessarily like how long homestay is going to actually go on, and be extended through. But at the end of the day, like, it will come to an end and our lives will pick up some new normal, And so like when I'm having one of those really hard moments of holding the irritation, which I liked how you said that, holding the irritation. And I don't want to hold the irritation. Like, instead of necessarily holding it kindly, I'll just be like, okay, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. And I'll give myself time to actually feel free and letting it know that it's going to pass. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to add a 5th one to that.
Go. See,
that'll be a perfect one to wrap it up. So if you have a chance to, I can't recommend taking classes at Dragon's Breath Yoga enough. So if you're feeling like doing something active, something fiery, maybe take a class with Darin or with any of the other forest teachers, flow teachers. If you want to do something a little more slow moving, more peaceful, I teach yin yoga. I know Amy does yin yang on Sundays, which kind of combines both of them. So we're here for you. We are your community. And I'd love to see you guys in Zoom for the time being and in person sometime soon, right?
Yep. Hopefully soon.
Soon enough, in some form anyway. We'll figure that out, but
it's
for another time.
As always, if you watch this video and you like it, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. I don't know where all those buttons are.
Below. That'll be below. So, perfect.
And comment with your own best practices for finding mindfulness. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, no, thank you, Darin. This is a good chat. So
have a great day.
Yeah, thanks. You too, man.